Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Harm's Way, Common Suffering, on September 29th on Metal Blade Records. The album has 10 tracks, 34 minutes in length, and this is the band's 5th full-length studio album. They are an American hardcore band. Now, this record from a design standpoint is really interesting. I honestly really enjoyed how they put the whole record together. It's a very dense album, it's a very thick sounding album. There's a lot of commonalities between the songs, so it's important for the listener's point of view that the record offers at least some ebbs and flows, at least some changes, so that the overall record doesn't just feel like one really long song or one really long piece. This album definitely has at least 2 tracks that do that offer not only an end to side A and an end to side B, but definitely offer a different sound, a different vocal approach, a different experience that softens the blow and definitely helps thin out the overall density of the album. And that is Undertow and Wanderer. A song, like I said, that finishes side A, and then a song that finishes the record finishing side B. Both tracks have similarities in terms of how different they are from the rest of the album, and that is definitely a highlight of the design, knowing exactly when you need to break, when you need to pause, when you need to change direction. These 2 tracks are fundamental in the overall feel of the record, and when you tie those 2 songs with the 34 minutes in length, these are the attributes that the record offers in order to make it itself a little bit easier to digest from a listener's perspective. Now, as far as the sound is concerned, this album is very thick. It has a dense experience, one that offers a lot of fuzziness, especially coming from the guitars and bass, but that becomes the common denominator almost throughout each and every single song. Having that soundscape allows the record at times to become a little bit predictable. You'll almost know what's coming around the corner because there's not a lot of changes. The album is moving in a very straightforward line, is a very linear record, and outside of Undertow, Wanderer, and maybe Terrorizer, there's not many changes, there's not many surprises that this record puts forward. So having this sound, having this fuzziness on the sound, specifically, like I said, coming from the bass and guitars, while creates a sense of thickness across the album, it doesn't necessarily give you the right feel as far as heaviness is concerned. I wanted to see perhaps the guitars have a little bit less of that experience because it makes the record feel a little bit too sludgy. It makes the record feel a little bit too industrial. And I felt like for an album with these characteristics, with this song styles, with these structures, maybe having a warmer guitar sound, a thicker but warmer guitar sound would make the album feel a lot heavier. If you're gonna go with more of the sludgier industrial style, then you need a few more tracks than just Undertow, Wanderer, and even Terrorizer in order to change the dynamics of the record, in order for the album to be a little bit more dynamic. Because this sound, this experience, like I said, it becomes very predictable. So the only way for it to work across 10 tracks is if every song kind of takes the listener into a different direction. And that's not what's happening here. Obviously, they added a few tracks here and there in order to create breaks, but those breaks, sound-wise, are not enough to take away from the overall perception of this record. Now, the guitars are not always fuzzy. They don't always have that sort of experience. Sometimes they feel very driven, and I like the alternating of elements. When the guitars feel a little bit more driven, the bass comes in with more impact, and then the bass becomes that element that adds that fuzziness to the sound. This was an interesting change. It doesn't happen very often on this record, but you could see it happening here and there. Perhaps Cyanide is a perfect song that really describes that experience. And I felt like maybe having a little bit more of that would also be interesting. It would definitely create some more dynamic elements within the soundscape of this album. The drums all around I really enjoy. I felt like the drums were super consistent from beginning to end. And if there's definitely one element on this album that adds that sort of warmth that otherwise is kind of lacking, it's definitely coming from the drums. Great drum sound all around. Vocally is a very consistent record. What you get in the beginning is pretty much what you're going to get in the end. There are a few nuances here and there, some clean vocals, some more electronic industrial style vocal approach, backing vocals, and the backing vocals work really well throughout this record. When they were used, they always add a sense of a live experience, of a live atmosphere to the tracks, so they had a very clear impact on what they were giving to the songs. But outside of these little nuances, it's a very straightforward record. Not that I was expecting anything else, but these nuances was enough to kind of give you a little bit of a different feel and definitely make the vocal performance slightly more dynamic than the sound itself. It's an album that has interesting tracks, but it feels like it just kind of circles itself. It doesn't, even though it moves in a linear fashion, it doesn't necessarily push the listener forward. It just makes you spiral. And that's not necessarily a great feel for any album. Now, being 34 minutes in length, it doesn't let the album become overly repetitive, but there is some redundance in the soundscape of this album that takes away from the overall playability. When I get to the end of this album, those songs that stand out in the crowd are the ones that I found myself gravitating to. The album needed more tracks like that. It needed to be more diverse. And I'm someone that always loves balanced records, but sometimes too balanced is also a bad thing. This album needed to be a little bit more dynamic if you're gonna go with this specific soundscape, if you're gonna go with this specific approach. Now, as far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Denial. The backing vocals are definitely a great element of this track. It adds to the overall heaviness and thickness of the sound. Guitars, bass, drums work really well to create a single point of reference as far as the sound is concerned, and then the vocals just add to that experience, to that fuzziness, to that heaviness, to that volume that the track has. The backing vocals help break through, give a live vibe to this song, but definitely help break through the more linear approach that the overall vocal performance adds. Now, when you get into the midway point of this track, the song becomes a lot more driven. It feels like it has more of a sense of purpose, and when it gets that sense of purpose going, the bass kind of comes in and helps fill in the gap. So it's a song that becomes very layered, very textured, but very compact at the same time. It never loses its shape from beginning all the way to the end. Another one of my favorite songs on this record is definitely Cyanide. One of the heaviest tracks on this album is a stomping sounding song, a song that has a great aggression both in the sound and in terms of how the vocals come across. The guitars are a little bit more dynamic on this track. They have a little bit more movement. They feel a little bit more vibrant. They feel a little bit more stretched out. And then the bass really pushes itself forward. This is a very bass-centric song, because what you're lacking in the guitars in terms of thickness, heaviness, and fuzziness, the bass compensates for it. And because it compensates for it, it takes more of a predominant role, allowing the guitars to be pushed back a little bit further and be a little bit more dynamic, be a little bit thinner. It's a really interesting song from that standpoint, because it's a track that still has great guitar sound, that the guitars still have a great impact, but it really feels driven by how the bass comes across and how impactful that bass sound is from start to end. Last but definitely not least, and outside of Undertow, which is my favorite song on this record, Terrorizer is definitely a close second. It's a more industrial, sludgiest song, definitely the one that has those two attributes better defined from beginning to end. It's a great track from that standpoint. It's very repetitive, but that repetitiveness never gets boring. I actually really enjoy the repetitiveness of the sound and how repetitive the lyrics and the vocals are as well. It's a song that just becomes a mirror of itself with every single step that you take. But because of it, it also becomes super catchy, super hooky. It has this really thick experience to it. Like I said, a mixture of sludge and industrial coming together as one in the sound and in the vocals. But a perfect track. It has all the right ingredients. It has all the right elements. It really gives you a clear picture of what this song is all about from the get-go, and you're completely hooked to it, regardless of how much it repeats itself It's just an absolute earworm of a song. This is it, Harm's Way with Common Suffering, out September 29th on Metal Blade Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Hit me up in the comment section. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.